Many years ago, Pastor John Piper said, missions exist because the worship of God does not. And that is the primary reason why we are committed to global missions as a church, because we love God and because we want to see God receive worship from all the men and women and children that he created. We love God, so we're committed to global missions. But we would be amiss if we didn't acknowledge that we are also involved in missions because we love people. And we are concerned about where they're going to spend eternity. And we know as Christ followers that the only way that they will spend eternity with the one true God is through faith in his Son, Jesus Christ. And the only way that they can believe in Jesus is if we take the good news of the gospel and share it with them. And so that's another reason why we're committed to missions, because we love people. But we also need to acknowledge that we're not just concerned about their souls. We believe that we're holistic beings. We were created with a physical body, but also a spirit or a soul. And we obviously care about their souls, but we also care about their physical being as well. And so the best way to get their attention, the best way for us to get an audience who wants to hear the message that we have to share is to show that we care for them as people, as individuals. And that's really been the emphasis of our conference this weekend. That in addition to what we already do in terms of traditional missions, of sending out missionaries or finding missionaries who are church planners from America that we want to support, that's good. In addition to occasionally sending teams from our own church to be involved with a short-term project to help one of the missionaries that we support, which is also good. We've been challenged this weekend to think long-term in terms of also building long-term relationships with churches and communities around the world where God is presently at work. And so I'm excited about what God has already taught us this weekend and what he will continue to teach us through the message this morning. So we have as our special keynote speaker this weekend, Dr. Paul McGinnis. I've mentioned this already, but I've known Paul for about 17 years. When I was a student at Baptist Bible Seminary in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, he was the associate pastor of Parker Hill Community Church, the church that my wife Kathy and I committed to while I was in seminary, and I got to know Paul there. Paul was involved with a lot of different things as associate pastor, but constantly he led the church in global initiatives. And I had the opportunity to hear him share what God was doing, and I was excited. Also, Paul now is currently serving as an adjunct professor with Clark Summit University, where I also taught as an online professor until I came here. So we have that in common as well. Paul is also the author of 2 books, Follow Me, 21 Timeless Leadership Lessons, and also Walk This Way, A Better Path to Global Engagement. And it's this book on which this conference really has been based. Just so you know, Paul, I did not grab this off of your table. These are my copies because I'm a fan of your writing. And as soon as you have another book ready to be published, let me know so I can get it on the pre-order list. So again, we are privileged to have Dr. Paul McGinnis with us, and I'm going to welcome him up at this time.
Can you just give that mic to Amy? Thanks so much. So good to be with you, many of you, since last night, and
Proud of you for sticking with us all the way. Some of you just showing up today, and I'm proud of you for sticking with us, even though there's a Buffalo Bills logo on the screen. So let me just explain that before you start throwing things. I just typically use this slide to introduce myself and to help people, connect with a little bit of the good and bad of who I am. And you can decide which is which. The QR code there, you're welcome to use if you'd like to. If you want access to these slides and some other additional resources, that QR code will take you there. I am a Bills fan, but don't hold that against me. I'll just meet up with you guys on New Year's Eve when the Bills and the Patriots go at it, and we'll see how things go then. And Rex, that may have been one of the other reasons he invited me, just so that you know that there are a few other, Bills fans other than him. And so I'm in that category as well. Interesting visiting here on the week that you're about to launch community groups, because essentially that's when Rex visited the church that I used to pastor. Right before we launched groups, he and Kathy came. That was their first time at the church. And you, if you don't know this already about your pastor, not only his character, but his boldness, just walked right up to the pastor and said, "This is my first Sunday here, but could I lead one of those small groups?" After a little more conversation, we said, yeah, sure. We knew he was here to go to seminary. We knew that he was committing to our church for that stretch of time. And so that's how I got to know him. And so, if I were sticking around, maybe I'd volunteer to lead one of those community groups. And you could see if you had as much confidence in me as we had in Rex. But let me just say, you have a great pastor. He and Kathy are a blessing to you guys. And he did not put me up to that. But yeah, why don't you just thank them? Just the providential timing of him being able to lead you through the COVID disruption and just coming as your pastor just 3 years ago. And so be sure that as the scripture tells us, to honor and respect and follow, to pray for and support the men and women that God's put as leaders above us. So well done, and so good to be with you. Now, in case you weren't with us last night or this morning, I'm taking a risk here, because hopefully through last night and this morning, I've built some credibility. I've built a little bit of trust that you're going to go with me through this introduction. Because the last time, and often when I present this talk, it's to students. It's to young people. And I looked at my introduction for this talk, and yeah, it's really for students. And I was about to revamp the whole thing for Perryville, and I thought, no, they can handle it. They can handle this. And so just bear with me. We're going to have a little quiz, but I'm just going to tell you right now, for each answer, you're either going to stand up or sit down. And so some of you, if you want to just decide right now that you are the sitting down kind of answer person, that is fine. You can just sit down for all of the answers, and I won't think any less of you. For those of you that are a little more young and nimble, we're going to just try to ask this question: are you a superhero? Right? And I know this is where, you got to stick with me, because like I said, this is usually for students that I interact with. But are you a superhero? So we're just going to go through a quiz, and you'll see that one answer you stand up for, the other answer you sit down for. So let's just begin before you start throwing things. Do you like to fly? Right? Do you like to fly? So if yes, go ahead and stand up. If no, you can sit down. And that could be in a plane, a helicopter, a hot air balloon. If you like to fly, go ahead and stand up. We'll see, who has some superhero skills going for them. Very good. And also, as we go through this, you'll see how the superhero theme has infiltrated my family pictures throughout the years. Okay, can you become invisible? Right? If yes, you can stand. If no, you can sit down. Can you become invisible? Or maybe, do you wish you could become invisible? You can do that one as well. All right. What else? Okay. Would you rather live in Asgard or in Wakanda? Boy, now I'm really losing some of you if you're not in the Marvel, universe. Asgard is where Thor was from. Wakanda is where Black Panther. So, just take your pick on which one you'd prefer. All right, are you afraid of heights? And in a weird twist of irony, you have to stand up if you're afraid of heights. And, if you're afraid of bats, you can sit down. Because if you watch those... if you're afraid of both of them, you should probably just go now, because there's no hope for you to be a superhero. All right, this is a key, because, do you have a girlfriend or boyfriend, or, a significant other? In other words, a weakness that supervillain can exploit. If so, yes. If no, you can sit down. And whenever I do this one with students, sometimes I'll do this one, and now, are some of you wishing that you were standing instead of, or is the other person surprised that you're standing because they didn't know that it was official yet? And so we have some fun with that one. All right, do you ever wear stretchy pants? And don't worry, we won't drill down on this one too much. We'll just move right along and let you know that if you were a superhero, next slide, let me just say that it's time. It's time for the superheroes to rise up. You can go ahead and have a seat. Give yourselves a round of applause. That was impressive, and by far the most awkward and difficult part of this morning. So the worst is behind you. But the question that comes to mind every time the next Marvel movie comes out or the occasional DC Comics superhero movie comes out, what is with this obsession with superheroes and with saving the world? There's something deeply ingrained in us. There's something that we kind of just have a sense that this world isn't quite as it should be. And some things do need to be saved. Some things do need to be changed. Some things are going in the wrong direction. And the question that I'm going to ask you today is it time? Is it time to change the world? Is it time for things to change? Have things gone too far, gone far enough? We can't stand by any longer. And so if it's that moment, what kind of person would God use to change the world? What kind of person do you think he's looking for? Is he looking for Tony Stark or Thor or, Superman or Batman? Is he looking for someone who has no fears and no faults and can fly and become invisible? What kind of person would God use to change the world? And so I want to take you back to a time in history where the world did need some changing. And a time when things had gone far enough. And God said, that's it. It's time to intervene in a very specific way. And we're going to look at the story of Moses. We're going to go back to the book of Exodus. And we're going to set the stage here for Moses from Exodus chapter 2 and just give you a sense of what was going on at the time. So just listen as my wife reads these words.
The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them.
That's coming from Exodus chapter 2, and we'll be in Exodus 2 and 3 and some of 4 as we go along. Their cry came up to God. Yeah, if you know the story, you know that it was Joseph that got them into Egypt, and things were actually going pretty well at the end of Genesis. And he was able to reunite with his brothers, and his father returned, and 70 of them now taking up space there in Goshen under the protection of Pharaoh, living in the land of Egypt, living not yet as God in God's promised land, but living as God's promised people, well taken care of as Genesis closes. But then things get worse. Exodus opens up and a new Pharaoh has come, a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And meanwhile, the nation of Israel, that family of God, had continued to multiply. And now they were a threat to the Egyptians. And now he begins to oppress them and force them into slave labor. And their cries and their groans go up to God. But they cried and they groaned and they were oppressed for 400 years. And in that time, many of those generations had to wonder, is God still with us? Is God still present? And some of you may just need to hear this, that just because God is silent does not mean he is absent. Just because God is silent does not mean he is absent. He hears, he sees, he is concerned, he is going to act. God is never late. He sure does miss a lot of chances to be early, but he's never late. And through this slavery and through this groaning and through this turmoil, God is getting pieces in place. And it's time to change the world. And he's going to begin looking for someone. And let's take a look at who he's looking for in Exodus chapter 3.
Now Moses was tending the flock on the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground.
Let me just pause for a moment. And again, forgive me because I often speak to students. But I'm going to give you a little challenge. If it's not too much work, if it's not too much effort or energy, I want you to take off your shoes. And so you don't have to do this one, but just take off your shoes. We'll come back to why later on. But as we continue reading this setup, this interaction between Moses and God, if it's easy to do, go ahead and slip out of those shoes. Let's continue in verse 6.
Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them.
It would have been interesting to count the number of times God uses the first person singular pronoun I. And it's interesting to just look back at some of the things that God has said about himself. As his people are oppressed, as they're crying out to him, as their lives are in turmoil, God says, I have seen, I have heard, I am concerned, I have come down to rescue them. Just because he's silent does not mean he's absent. But what I want you to notice next is a very interesting change in the person of the pronoun that God uses. So far, God has said, I see, and I hear, and I'm concerned, and I'm going to make a change. And now, in verse 10, he says, so now I am sending you. Wait a second. God says, I've seen, and I've heard, and I'm concerned, and I'm going to save them, so now I'm going to send you. And Moses had to be cheering for the first four comments. Yes, God has seen, and yeah, God has heard, and yeah, God is concerned, and yeah, God is going to rescue them. And now I'm sending you. Wait a second. I thought you were going to save them. I thought you were concerned. I thought you were the one that was going to step in. Friends, when God steps in, it's through his people. The only thing stopping God's presence from continuing the only thing stopping God's kingdom from continuing to expand and grow is the willingness of God's people. God's arm has not been shortened. God is no less powerful. God is no less concerned. God is simply looking for people to send, for people to show that concern, for people to offer that rescue, for people to offer compassion. God is not just going to magically do it on his own. Right from the very beginning, right from the very book of creation, we see that God's plan is to partner with people to do his work and to expand his kingdom. And so when God sees and is concerned and is ready to make a change, he looks for you and he looks for me. And so what kind of person does God use to change the world? God uses someone who is willing to join what he is doing. That's the first qualification. That's the first question on the application. You see, God does not have this conversation with Moses that goes like this. So Moses, come on over to the burning bush. Thanks for joining me today. Take your shoes off, but step on in. Now, Moses, what plans did you have for your life? Moses, what is it that you would like to do, with the gifts and talents that, oh, by the way, I gave you? What is it that you would like to do with the who knows how much time you have left of your life, well, other than me? What is it that you would like to do, Moses? What are your plans? Where would you like to go to school? What kind of family would you like to have? What kind of pursuits and hobbies? What would you like to spend your income and your money on? You tell me what you want, Moses, and I'll see if I can sign off on that. Said no one ever. Right? That conversation didn't happen. And I think sometimes we get this one backwards because we make great plans and hopes and dreams for our lives and our college plans and our spouse and our house and our financial, pursuits and our hobbies. And then we hope that God will sign off on that. And I wonder what God thinks of that. The one who created us, the one who gifted us specifically with our gifts and passions and abilities, the one who's been with us, though he's been silent at times, has been with us through everything, the one who put us here at this specific time and place in history, on purpose, for a purpose. The God of the universe who has seen and heard and has compassion and wants to bring about change in our world. And he says, well, who's going to join me? Who's going to join the work that I am doing in this world? That's the first thing God's looking for. Not for you to write up the list of things you'd like him to do for you, but for you to offer the blank sheet of paper and say, God, I'm yours. You let me know. You show me where to go. Where you want me to go, I'll follow. And then I'll join what you're doing in that workplace, on that college campus, on that in that high school, on that sports team, or in that business opportunity. Joining what God is doing in those places. That's who God is looking for. That's the first conversation he has with Moses. Moses, here's what I'm going to do. You're invited. Get off the bench. Get off the sidelines. Get into the action. And let's change the world. I'm not going to do it on my own, Moses. I'm just looking for willing people who will say yes. So that's who God's looking for. At least that's the start. Let's continue on in verse 11. And here as the conversation continues.
But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what do I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you.
I love this interaction. And I think it's here that God lets us know another quality that he's looking for. When it's time to change the world, when things have gone far enough, when things need to come to an end or we need to turn a corner, God looks for someone first who will join what he's doing, and secondly, who will trust in who he is. God is looking for someone who will trust in who he is, not who they are, not what they bring to the table or what they offer to the equation. And this, perhaps, is why God has Moses take his shoes off. And if you did that, it probably feels a little uncomfortable. Now imagine walking in the wilderness like that. Now imagine walking, over gravel or around, some sticks and shrubs and rocks, right? We are a frail people. There is nothing more painful than stepping on a Lego with bare feet, right? As a father of 4 children, I know that nothing Moses experienced out there in the wilderness is like stepping on some Legos with bare feet. Why is it that we, as strong as we are, have such tender, soft, sensitive feet? We're a frail people. We are weak. And that's exactly the excuse that Moses brings up to God. Who am I? I can't do this. I can't deliver these people. And God says, yeah, that's kind of the point. I'm not expecting you to trust in who you are, Moses. I just want you to trust in who I am. And I can imagine the conversation continuing and Moses saying, but God, I'm not strong enough. And what does God say? I am. God, I'm not faithful enough. I am. God, I'm not wise enough. I am. God, I'm not compassionate enough. God says, I am. And to every one of Moses' excuses and every one of our excuses, when we say we are not enough, God simply says, I am. You see, friends, everything that we are not, he is. Everywhere that we fall short, he does not. And he sends us out to change the world, not in our own strength, because we are not strong enough, but he says, I am. And then not only everything we are not, he is, but everything we need, he is. God, who's going to comfort me? I am. God, who's going to provide for me? God says, I am. God, who's going to watch over my family? I am. Who's going to protect me? God says, I am. Do you see God's response, the simplicity and the beauty of it? Everything we need, he is. Everything we are not, he is. And so God is looking for someone who has gotten to the end of themselves and realized, I don't really have what it takes. I'm broken. I'm flawed. God says, exactly. That's who I'm looking for. And in fact, that's the only option. Right? If God were only looking for perfect people, for those that had it all together, he'd have nowhere to look, because there are none of those people. And so whatever excuses you kind of put up and send back at God, please don't think you're alone with those excuses. We all have those same ones, and God says that's no reason at all. That's no reason at all to stay on the sidelines or to stay out of the action. I'll take you broken as you are. That's the only option. In fact, that is what makes God look even better, is when he uses the broken and the cracked and the humble. And so God is looking for someone not with their own list of, plans, but someone who's willing to join what God is already doing, who's willing to join that work of proclamation and compassion and justice, who's going to join him as he loves and serves other people. And then God is looking for someone who's going to trust not in themselves, but trust in who he is, knowing that he is the one who is everything they need, and he is the one who is everything they are not. But the conversation isn't quite over yet. We're going to move into Exodus chapter 4 and listen as God and Moses continue to interact. Exodus chapter 4, verse 1.
Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied.
Not far from where I live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, we can head down a couple hours south to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You may have heard of Sight and Sound Theater, right? Where they every year put on a new theatrical performance of some biblical character. And my wife and I, for our anniversary, were able to go and see Moses. And I stole his staff before we left. So the shows are temporarily postponed because Moses doesn't have his staff. Just kidding. I brought it from my woods out back. And I can just imagine this part of the conversation between God and Moses, right? God has already taken away some of Moses' excuses. And they start talking, well, God, who's going to do all this? Well, you are, Moses. Well, yeah, I kind of had other plans, but okay. I'll get in line with your plans for my life. And then Moses says, but I don't really have what it takes. And God says, that's okay. I am what you need. I am who you need. And then Moses is still like, yeah, but how am I going to prove that you're with me? How am I actually going to, how are we going to make this happen? I don't have anything to kind of go with. And God says to him, well, what's that you have in your hand? Well, it's just a staff. And yet somehow that's God's answer to Moses. And I can just imagine Moses playing out that scene. Like okay, so I'm just going to march in, to Pharaoh and be like, hey, Pharaoh, I know you have, tens of thousands of Israelites as slaves, but let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, no, of course not. Get out of here. And Moses is like, but I have this staff. And then Pharaoh's like, oh, I got it. You have a staff. Then by all means, you and your people are welcome to go because, you brought a stick in with you. What's the significance of this? Right? Obviously, Moses carrying a stick around it's not some, new martial arts. It's not some magic wand. What is the significance of the staff? And we know throughout the story that God would use that staff. Even if we continued reading in Exodus, Moses would throw that staff down and it would become a snake. The ancient enemy of God's people, the archetype of evil. And Moses is shown as the one who can handle the snake, who can crush the snake. And that same staff God would use, that's what he would hold over Egypt and bring on the 10 plagues. That's the same staff that he would hold over the Red Sea and turn the sea into a sidewalk. But what is it about the staff? And I think it brings us to our last idea that God is looking for someone who will use whatever they have. They will just use whatever they have. There was nothing especially significant about the staff. It literally was a stick from Moses' backyard, but it's all he had. And so God says, that's fine. We'll use that. And we see that same theme over and over and over in Scripture. That God says to people, what do you have to offer? Okay, we'll use that. We see it in the Old Testament with Elijah. Elijah goes to a widow in Zarephath, right? And there's a drought and there's no food, there's no water. And Elijah goes to that widow and says, hey, would you just take care of me? And she says, man, I barely have enough food to take care of myself and my family. That's okay. Let's just use what you have. And she uses that flour and that oil. And what happens? It continues to multiply. And she continues to use the same flour and oil over and over again until the drought is done. And we go, forward a little bit in history, and there's this shepherd boy. And he doesn't have much, but he has a sling, and he's got some rocks. And God says, okay, let's use that. And he slings the rocks and takes down the giant. Right? Or we go ahead to the New Testament, and there's that poor widow who doesn't have much to offer, but she's got these 2 copper coins. And Jesus says, okay, we'll use that. Or we got Peter, right, who has little more than a boat and a big mouth. And God says, okay, we can use both of those. Well, one at a time. Let's see, can I use your boat? And then throw out your nets. And then eventually, in Acts chapter 2, Peter gets to use his big mouth to fish for men. And time again, we go up on the mountain with Jesus, and there's way more people than we can feed. But somebody steps up and says, I've got this Happy Meal. I've got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what are those among so many? That's okay, we can use that. Do you see that never at one point was God like, oh man, if only we had 7 loaves and 6 fish, that's what I really needed, If only we had somebody with a little more, experience and wisdom than Peter. If only we had somebody who had more than just a stick. God is never critical of what you bring to him. He says, okay, we can use that. And from beginning to end, God is looking for people who will use whatever they have. And friends, don't look now, but you have more than a stick. You have more than Moses had to offer. You have some influence, and so let's use that for kingdom purposes. You may not be rich, but you have some money, so let's use that. You may not have as much education as you would like, but you have some education, and you could use that. You have some free time. You have some experience. You have some skills. You have some passions and some abilities. I don't know what you have. That's not between me and you. That's between you and God. But whatever you have, God is looking for someone who's not like this, but like this. And even if all you had was some flour and oil, he would use that. Even if all you had was a stick, or 5 loaves and 2 fish, or 2 small copper coins. God is simply looking for someone who will use whatever they have. And friends, here at Perryville, I think we have some people like that. Because in one way or another, it is time for things to change. It is time for some things to come to an end and other things to take their place. It is time for the kingdom of God to continue to expand in this place and around the world. There are things that need to change, and God is hearing the cries of his people, and he is concerned, and he is ready to move into action, and he is ready to rescue people, and he's simply looking for people to say yes. He's simply looking for people who will join him in that pursuit, and that's what we've been talking about throughout this weekend, how that invitation is not just to the brightest and the best. That invitation is to all of us. It's God saying, here's what I'm doing in this world. I'm showing love. I'm showing grace. I'm setting captives free. I'm showing compassion on those that are hurting. Who will join me in that? Who will speak up and reach down and stand up on my behalf? I'm looking for people who will join me in that. And just like Moses, we have plenty of excuses, and we don't have it all together, and we don't have it just right. And God says, that's the only kind of people I look for. It's people who aren't trusting in their own abilities and their own goodness and character and strength, but people who will trust who he is. And hopefully that trust, that wasn't just a one-time thing that you did at some point in your life, but hopefully that's a daily, ongoing, step-by-step, moment by moment. God, less of me and more of you. And what's that next step you want me to take? I want to join you. I want to trust you. And God, I'm going to open my hands. We may not have much, but we have something. Right? Interesting that Jesus tells this story a couple times, that the manager gives one guy 10 bags of gold and one guy 5 bags and one guy 1. He tells it another time, it's 3 and 2 and 1. He wants us to understand this story. He doesn't want us to compare what we have with what other people have. That's never the point of the story. The guy that's given less is not off the hook because, somebody else has more. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is that God has given us something. None of us has nothing. No one has nothing to offer. And God simply says, whatever you have to offer, would you open your hands with that? Would you be open-handed and generous? Because not only can I then use it, but then I could pour out more. We could do a lot of cool stuff together if you would just let me. And I don't know what that looks like for you as individuals. I mean, you're going to have to ask God that. What do we have? How can we join you with that? What does that look like for you and your family? What does that look like for the next, vacation opportunity or the next education opportunity? What would it look like for you as a family to join God and make that a missional pursuit? What would that look like for you as a church? You don't have a lot, but you have something. You have some things to offer this community. You have some things to offer this world in terms of grace and hope and love, being good neighbors, being good citizens. Friends, it's time to change the world. And God's not looking for people that can fly or wear stretchy pants. He's looking for people who will join him and people who will trust him and people who will use whatever they have. And I have a feeling that those people are here today. And God's nudging your heart and moving you forward. And I can't wait to see how together with God, how you are part of a catalyst of change here in Perryville and in Rhode Island, in our country, and around the world. Father, that's our heart. That's our desire, is that we would be part of the change that you're bringing about in this world. God, we want to see that change. We want to be part of that change. We're not just going to sit back and passively hope that you will magically do something. God, what you want is for us to step forward and to allow you to use us to bring love, to bring grace, to bring hope, that we would be part of that change, that we would be part of the expansion of your kingdom. I pray that for the people of Perryville. I pray that for the people here in Rhode Island, that your people of God would be ones who would trust you and join you and use whatever we have to expand your kingdom and change the world. Amen.